Welcome back for another book review. Today we are talking about this one. So this is the Wicca Handbook by Eileen Holland. So I would put this one at a 2 out of 5. Is it the worst thing ever written? No. Is it really worth buying? Also no. So the main thing with this book is that the author doesn't really stay consistent with what she's doing, first of all. And honestly, just some of the things she says are just not, it's not it for me. Personally, whenever I come across any author in the witchcraft community and pagan community that has to put down other people and argues that witches and Wiccans are not sacrificing animals in the backyard and then immediately jumps to doing the same thing to Satanist groups, as in a very broad toss-all term without any nuance of those communities and how they vary as well, it's a red flag. If you're gonna claim nobody can stereotype us, you need to not do the same thing to other people. Of course, we start off with you cannot just go buy your tools. You have to have them gifted or make them yourself, because obviously your chalice or your candles on your altar are gonna malfunction because you bought them. Truly the logic I don't get. I never have gotten that one, but like, you know, that level of Wiccan. And of course, the argument that everything must be love and light, white magic only, as in positive magic, and nothing harmful, things like that. And of course, that you must follow the Wiccan Rede, aka harm none. And while most Wiccans typically are going to include the god and the goddess equally, this is definitely more goddess-centric Wicca, where it is the goddess. The goddess is the main one. From there, everything else kind of falls to the wayside. In that we do not actually have any mentions really of the god whenever we're talking about divinity as a whole. It's the goddess. She also has some really random parts in here that didn't completely make sense to me, because she talks the first half all about the goddess, capitals. But then when you get to the correspondences and the spells, we're using specific gods and goddesses. So I was like a little inconsistent there, and all of the correspondences always had a huge list of various cultures. A lot of them I didn't recognize. We went well beyond the usuals, which you'd think would be good, but I felt like we needed to have like some kind of background knowledge, some kind of mention of where they're even coming from, why they're being selected for all of these things. Because even from the Norse names that I would come across here and there were a few of them that I was questioning why you're putting them with this when there's other ones that would be a better option. And it, in a lot of ways, reminded me of a DJ Conway book where we're just trying to encompass as much as possible and probably not well researched. And I'll get to why in just a minute, at least for a specific example with the Norse, which really raised a lot of flags for me. But one of the biggest things that has really stuck with me for this book, and I just can't get over, is that she's so heavily focused on it must be the Wiccan Rede, you must do it this way, it is this way, blah blah blah. And like, her definition of it is very non-wavering. It is this way, any other is not as applicable. And it's just like, no. But like, how she describes being Wiccan or her variation of a witch is very strange. And I have the full quote on my Patreon, but she talks about how a witch is like to set yourself apart from all other humans, and is like, that sounds cultish. And then you must be a priest or priestess to the goddess. Definitely not a requirement, maybe in their tradition, but as a whole, to be a witch, that's not required. You can be a witch, be agnostic, or an atheist. Like, it's totally a valid option. And then the last part to be a witch was that you had to serve the life force, which felt weird. Why would you word it that way when the life force is supposed to be the goddess? And we just talked about the goddess. What? It was strange. It felt a little culty. Did not love it. But I mentioned all of that and how Wiccan she is. And then she mentions like random cultures here and there, which didn't really feel applicable. Like occasionally she'll mention like some random stuff about Buddhism. Cool. This is supposed to be a book on Wicca and Hindu things, and like Hindu beliefs or Chinese beliefs, but it's supposed to be Wiccan. Like, it was really random, and again, kind of felt like a DJ Conway book, where there's like random bits of information that don't particularly feel like it matched the topic that we were talking about. This is supposed to be the Wicca Handbook, not spiritualities and where they overlap. Like, it was just really strange. But I could forgive that. Whatever, you want to include some information, so be it. But she doesn't even explain some of the Wiccan concepts well enough to really be like a beginner book. Like, she explains some stuff, like your tools and basic beliefs and whatever, but then she'll just casually mention like the watchtowers or like the lords of the watchtowers or whatever. I don't do that part of Wicca, so I haven't really researched it much, but she doesn't explain that part at all. Nothing. It's just a mention and that you should just know this, which if it's for a beginner, not helpful. Intermediates, maybe. But then why are you explaining things in such detail at the beginning of the book for other parts of it? So the two things that really bothered me about this book is that she's not consistent. And the thing is, she mentions everywhere that it's the goddess, capitals, she's the all-encompassing universe, basically. And then later, she compares the gods, plural, with the elementals, and that the elementals are more powerful than the gods, which is questionable, and that the gods are a safer bet than the elementals, and that because they're not as powerful, they can't like ruin your life as much. And I'm like, have you ever looked at some of the like troublemakers in any mythology? Every single one has at least one or two. And like in Norse, if you mess around with Loki, inevitably chaos will ensue. And if you call on the Morrigan, expect rapid, drastic change, because that's what she does. Like, every single culture has something like that. There is some god that rules over and creates chaos in your life. I don't know if I call upon any of like the elements, my life is going to be wrecked to shreds. But it was just weird that she was in one breath saying it's just the goddess. Now suddenly there's other gods, but they're just not as powerful as the random elementals. But then later on, the gods are supposed to just be thought forms and like a human construct, archetypes. And it's like, well, yeah, an archetype would probably be less powerful than an element. Yeah. Okay. Like, it was so weird and so inconsistent, because then when you get to the correspondences, that's all that is. It lists all of these random deities. Like, you're gonna have to research a lot of them unless you're well versed in all of world mythology, because there's a number of names I haven't come across in all of the books I've read that it's like, where in the world are you even coming from? Like, is this like somewhere in the Asian continent? Is this somewhere in the African continent? Is it somewhere in the American continents? Whether it's North or South America, which one? I don't know. And she never says. And with that, it does make me question how well she's researched all of these deities, because the way she uses some of them is really questionable. So I'm only going to really use the Norse myths because that's the one that I've been researching the most, and I know those myths sort of better than the others because I haven't really cared about mythology. But now that I've been looking more into the Norse, it's just strange. So for example, I believe she listed like Freya for marriage, but Freya's usually not exactly a marriage goddess. If you look into her, really, she's not a married goddess. She's single. She's well known to hook up with a lot of people. She has no qualms with that. So she's really more about like getting you laid, not necessarily finding your forever person. Now, in some Norse circles, Freya and Frigg are together. They're the same goddess, different names, because the gods love to do that in Norse myth. And so it's like, if you follow that trend, sure, because Freya, if she's supposed to be Frigg, Frigg is usually associated with the household, marriage, stuff like that, sure. But then no, and then Frigg isn't ever associated there, and she's mentioned later on separately, so it's like, okay. And it's like, there's plenty of other options that would be great to include there as well. Not included. So it was just like, it felt really handpicked and random for the deities she's choosing to include. And it makes me wonder about the other ones. And again, I don't know the other cultures as much, but it does beg the question if these ones are a little inconsistent. Again, in not even explaining why you would put them either. There's no explanations. But the one that really honed in specifically on the topic of researching the gods, and also ties into another point, which is the Wiccan read, you know, don't harm anybody. She literally has a binding spell using Odin. And I'm like, sketchy, sketch. But then the myth she's using as the example that we're following along for the spell doesn't make any sense. So it's a binding spell to use against somebody else, so, you know, I guess free will over your own body and spirit and whatever's just like hucked out the window because that doesn't matter. Obviously that is not harmful behavior at all, but whatever. So like there's that side of it, because like a binding, if you're Wiccan, probably shouldn't be happening, because like you're taking away someone's free will, that's harmful. But whatever, setting that part of it aside, like the myth doesn't make sense for a binding spell. Because yes, Odin hung from the tree for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the wisdom of the runes, and he sacrificed himself to himself. You aren't sacrificing yourself to yourself in a binding against somebody else, because the binding is to bind somebody else. And so you're not really doing the myth, because you're making them sacrifice. You aren't sacrificing yourself. If anything, if you're using that myth, I would use that more along the lines of like, even if you wanted to do a binding on yourself, whatever, but like to do that for like going to get a PhD or something along those lines in the search of knowledge. And you're setting yourself out to do that, and you're sacrificing the current you for the future you that's gonna know stuff. That would be more applicable. But binding somebody because Odin hung from a tree for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the wisdom of the runes felt really weird. And on top of that, if you look just like a little bit deeper into Norse myth, there's better options. Why? If you wanted to include Odin, why aren't you like having the myth where they're tying up Fenrir, who is dangerous, who is like warning to everybody and is like, hey, like this thing is getting obnoxious and it's gonna get worse. And the fates are, you know, the Norns are gonna say that like it's eventually gonna kill you. So let's bind the thing that's really harmful and could potentially be even more harmful. That would be a good myth to choose. Also holding people accountable for their actions. Loki. That myth. He's the reason for earthquakes if you look into it. So like it doesn't make any sense why you're picking that one for a binding, which makes me question some of the other things that she's including, because again, it's like, walk me through this logic. She doesn't. But the creme de la creme of crap of this book is again coming back to the Wiccan read part, but specifically, again, harming none, you know, free will, all that good stuff. So we've got a spell to attract the attention of the one you desire. And I'm just going to read the little spell part that you speak, because I feel like this is going to give you some context of why this is problematic of a book. By the 4 posts of my bed, I turn your head, I turn your head. By my loins and by my thighs, I dry your eyes, I dry your eyes. With majorium and a bowl of glue, I make you think of me as I think of you. I cause you to look at me, I cause you to look at me. I make you enchanted by what you see. That's not ripping away somebody's free will. And then we also have some other great ones here of a little bit later down on the love chapter. We have, I melt your heart as I melt this wax, even as this wax flows, your love for me grows. And then on the next page, we've got like another, like, we'll not read the whole thing, but it's just like, it's really toxic. So we're just gonna jump a little bit in because it's a little bit of a longer one. But like, by the power of 3 times 3, thy waking thoughts shall be of me. From now through eternity, no peace or increase shall you find until your hand is joined in mine. I bind thee heart and soul and mind to me. I bind thee eyes and thoughts and loins to me. I bind thee to me forever with cords of velvet longing. By the white rose and the rosemary. And then I think it just kind of goes on for a little bit. But yeah, it ends pretty close with, I bind thee to me forever. And it's just like, dude, absolutely not. So anyways, that's my final example. I feel like that really sets the tone of this book. If you're going to include that kind of wording and stuff, red flags. Don't recommend. Is it the worst thing ever written? Probably not. It did have some good information. Do I recommend you spend your money on this book? Absolutely not. So anyways, that is going to be it for this book review. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one in the comments down below. Huge thank you to my patrons. I'll have their names here on the screen. If you'd like to support me and get access to exclusive content, it is patreon.com/nightwillowcrafts. Make sure to like and subscribe. I post every single day, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and blessed be.